Back in August, musician Chappell Roan released a pair of TikTok videos recounting some of the harassment she's faced from some of her fans since her rapid rise to fame over the last year. The videos have since sparked a broader conversation about parasocial relationships in our culture, in which even individuals with modest followings on social media or platforms like TikTok and YouTube may occasionally experience bizarre or invasive one-sided interactions with their followers. This is an issue that I have personally grappled with and written about. In my silly and surreal novel, 99 Erics, and yes, that is a banana slug on a magic wand on the cover, the narrator-protagonist Cat Cataclysm goes into this brief digression about why she doesn't understand why anyone would want to become famous. Quote, "Because people treat celebrities like shit. They really do. Like, when you're famous, other people feel entitled to constantly comment on your dress and appearance, and to dissect and critique your every move. They'll stare at you or holler at you as you're walking down the street. And even if you're just minding your own business at some bar or club, people will think nothing of coming right up to you and engaging you in conversation. Actually, now that I think about it, people treat celebrities pretty much the same way they treat young women. There's a feminist analysis in here somewhere. I'm pretty sure of it. A few years later, I would write up that feminist analysis. It appears in my 2022 book, Sexed Up: How Society Sexualizes Us and How We Can Fight Back. Specifically, it can be found in Chapter 3, Unwanted Attention. The chapter begins with my experiences 20-some years ago when I transitioned from male to female and first began experiencing street remarks and harassment, as many young women do. While I wasn't surprised about receiving said harassment per se, as I was well aware of what my female friends faced, I was quite shocked by some of the dynamics involved, particularly what I have come to call phantom invitations. What follows is a reading from that chapter. I'll start with the last few paragraphs of the section on young women's experiences with phantom invitations, then segue to the next section on how we treat celebrities. So here we go, and as always, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting my work on Patreon, link in the show notes. Here's how I have come to make sense of this reversal of standard social rules. My harassers acted as though I had invited their attention, when in fact I had done nothing of the sort. I'll refer to these as phantom invitations, as they existed solely in the minds of the people who perceived me. Normally, if someone invades your personal space, asks you intrusive questions, or insults you to your face, most people would agree that they have behaved inappropriately, and that you are warranted in calling them out on their bad behavior. But because I was perceived as inviting these men's attention, due to the fact that I was a woman out in public, my harassers' intrusions were suddenly deemed warranted, and it was my protests against those intrusions that were now deemed inappropriate. Here's a particularly illustrative example of such phantom invitations. During the year leading up to my transition, I had a routine on Fridays where, after my late afternoon therapy, I would go to a particular bar that I liked. This bar had good and expensive beers, plus it was mostly empty at that time of day, so I found it a productive place to write. I always sat in a booth by myself, and nobody ever once bothered me. But shortly after I began transitioning, an older man approached me and asked if I was a biker girl, presumably because there were motorcycles parked out front. I said no, and he then said that he wanted to tell me a story. So I gestured at my notebook and told him that I was busy writing. He then started yelling at me for not being interested in his story, and eventually stormed off. It was baffling to me at the time because I was very clearly busy writing. And if I were a man, as I had been in as much as possible on all of my previous visits to this bar, anyone watching this scene would have agreed that his interruption was out of order. Yet this guy acted as though I had invited his interruption. And because he felt invited, from his perspective, it was my refusal to participate that seemed out of order. While sexual objectification and sometimes flat-out misogyny often accompany the street harassment that women face, there seems to be more to it than that. Given the range of my own personal experiences, I want to suggest an alternative and non-mutually exclusive framework for understanding this phenomenon. Male street harassers seem to view and treat women as though we are public spectacles. The word spectacle implies some kind of display, show, or performance that is put on for the benefit of others. This explains why these men misperceive us as inviting their attention and remarks. Spectacles can take many forms: an awesome display of fireworks, a gruesome car accident, a confusing message spray painted on the sidewalk, and so on. Regardless of whether they are viewed positively, negatively, or neutrally, spectacles strike people as conspicuous, and perhaps even unexpected, so they attract attention and commentary. If you happen to be deemed a public spectacle yourself, then all of this scrutiny, strangers staring and making candid remarks about you, will seem like obvious breaches of standard social protocol. In contrast, these observers and harassers cannot fathom that they are doing anything wrong because from their standpoint, the public spectacle has demanded their attention. I believe this framing helps to explain a wide breadth of experiences that women often have with unwanted attention, whether sexual in nature or not. It also helps to explain why men who make street remarks don't view themselves as misbehaving, and why people more generally tend to downplay the seriousness of street harassment, as we've all been socialized to unconsciously view women as attracting and inviting the attention that they receive. But this phenomenon doesn't end here. In actuality, many different subgroups of people are treated as though they are public spectacles for reasons other than, or in addition to, being female. In fact, my understanding of unwanted attention has been strongly informed by two other aspects of my person that are often treated analogously. The next section is entitled Sublebrity. The word celebrity typically refers to people who are famous, literally celebrated, for one reason or another. Celebrity is often associated with certain privileges, wealth, power, influence, but it also evokes negative connotations. For instance, celebrities are often stereotyped as superficial, vain, frivolous, fake, and insincere. Interestingly, many of these adjectives are also associated with women and femininity, and some of them even appear on the table of opposites. More to the point, we, non-celebrities, tend to treat celebrities like they are public spectacles that, much like young women, seem to invite our attention. If a slew of photographers showed up outside your front door and followed you around wherever you went, and if media outlets published stories divulging intimate details of your personal life, you would likely call that stalking and an invasion of your privacy. Yet when people do these things to celebrities, we don't think much of it. In fact, we may even be inclined to view these celebrities as attracting and inviting all that attention themselves. If you were simply walking down the street and a stranger started hollering at you, you would likely consider that rude. If you were sitting in the booth of some bar or restaurant, just minding your own business, and someone came right up to you and attempted to initiate a conversation, you would likely consider that intrusive. Yet, if you happen to see a movie star walking down the street, or sitting alone in a bar or restaurant, you might find yourself shouting out their name, or approaching them for an autograph. In other words, you might feel phantomly invited to interact with them, and assume that they will welcome your intrusion. And if they were to rebuff you, you might interpret their behavior as rude or cold, and deem them to be the bad actor in the situation. No pun intended. Years ago, a friend told me a story about their visit to New York City. While there, they walked into a random, sparsely populated bar, perhaps not unlike the one I would enjoy writing in years later, and saw a famous comedian sitting by himself at the bar, just having a drink. My friend described the comedian as obviously desperate and starved for attention. After all, why would this comedian go to a bar alone, if not to attract the recognition and admiration of others? At the time, I totally bought my friend's account. It seemed perfectly reasonable to me. But over the years, I've come to question it. I mean, a lot of comedians live in New York City, so maybe it was simply this guy's local bar. Perhaps he was just getting a drink, much as I was doing in the earlier anecdote. Maybe the comedian, like me, actually wanted privacy, which was why he chose to go to a quiet bar with few people in it. Yet because my friend viewed this comedian as a public spectacle, rather than a normal person, they projected a whole series of ulterior motives onto him. The comedian must have been desperate, starved for attention, and craving admiration. all of which, non-coincidentally, are routine justifications for street remarks and harassment targeting women. I am not, by any means, a celebrity. But a friend once called me a sublebrity, by which she meant someone who is famous within a smaller subculture. Specifically, while my first book, Whipping Girl, never made any bestseller lists, and you won't find it in any airport book displays, it did garner notoriety within LGBTQIA+ and feminist circles. So while the overwhelming majority of people have no clue who I am, in these spaces, my name often precedes me, which can lead people to perceive and treat me as a celebrity of sorts. I want to share a few of my experiences with sublebrity here, not to complain, as I'm very grateful for the recognition my writings have received, but rather because I have found them fruitful for making sense of public spectacles, phantom invitations, and the reversal of social protocols that often accompany them. On occasions when I'm going about my everyday life, out with friends, or attending an event, it is not uncommon for people who recognize me to approach and share their thoughts with me. Let's call these sublebrity remarks, akin to street remarks. They too run a gamut that I will call the good, the bad, and the neutral, as even the worst of these remarks are nowhere near the graphic, ugly comments that I've received for being a woman. As you might imagine, the bulk of these are compliments or thank yous from people who appreciate my work. These are the good remarks. On other occasions, I have had strangers walk right up to me and say, "I didn't like Whipping Girl," or "I am known for my critiques of your work," or similarly negative assessments. As a longtime author, I'm very used to criticism, and people are obviously free to openly express their views about me and my work. But it is rather jarring to have people, in real life and out of the blue, interrupt my conversation with friends to levy such critiques. Perhaps most telling are the neutral remarks, so called because they are from people who have no strong opinions about me or my work, but nevertheless approach me, likely because they feel phantomly invited. Sometimes after saying, "You're Julia Serrano, aren't you?" they have nothing to add. Sometimes they will apologize for not having read my books. I always assure them that this is perfectly okay, as they are not required reading for talking to me. Other times, after confirming my identity, they will ask, "Why are you here?" I try to resist the temptation to flip this around and ask, "Well, why are you here?" Instead, I'll often say something banal, such as, "I'm at this queer karaoke event because I'm a queer person who enjoys karaoke." Anyway, the only way the latter interventions make any sense is if, rather than viewing me as a normal person for whom standard social protocols apply, these individuals saw me as a public spectacle that they could inquire about or comment upon, even if they didn't have much to say. Many people who approach me with sublebrity remarks recognize that I am a human being with my own life and concerns, and thus will make a point of opening with "excuse me" or "sorry to interrupt," as we typically do with strangers. Sometimes, however, this fact seems to elude the people who approach me, and instead they abruptly interrupt me as I'm in the middle of doing something. After exchanging a few words, if I politely mention that I need to get back to what I was doing, these people will sometimes act annoyed or upset, as though I had wronged them or denied them an experience that they felt entitled to. One time at a conference, I was catching up with a friend whom I hadn't seen in a long while, and someone came up to us and hovered for a bit. Normally I would have said hello and invited them into our conversation, as one does at conferences, but my friend was in the middle of telling me a story, so I didn't want to interrupt her. When she finally finished her story, this stranger pointedly said to my friend, "You're monopolizing all her time," as though I was merely a shared public resource with no autonomy of my own. While the remark was disconcerting in the moment, I've come to understand it and similar comments in terms of phantom invitations. Because they saw me as a public spectacle, these individuals felt entitled to interact with me, so if I or my friend seemingly denied them that opportunity, they interpret that denial as unfair and out of order. This last point dovetails with the final sublebrity experience that I believe sheds light on this phenomenon. Occasionally, I will meet someone new, such as a friend of a friend, and we will strike up a conversation. At some point, After talking for a while, they will become aware that I am someone they consider a sublebrity. Oftentimes, they simply express mild surprise, but occasionally they will become upset with me, or with their friend who introduced us, for not having let them know precisely who I was sooner. Basically, they feel as though they have been tricked or deceived. I remember one person angrily insisting that I should have been upfront with them from the beginning. Of course, if I had gone out of the way to introduce myself as Julia Serrano, they might have viewed me as a narcissistic sublebrity who must be starving for attention or craving admiration, much as my friend presumed about the famous comedian. In other words, there seems to be a double bind at work here, where if I embrace being a public spectacle, I'm viewed as inviting any and all attention that I receive. But if I play it down or fail to acknowledge it, I may be accused of deceiving or denying people who feel that they have a right to treat me as a spectacle. I haven't had an analogous experience to this as a woman, as nobody views me as hiding or withholding the fact that I am female from them. However, I most certainly have experienced accusations of tricking or deceiving people regarding my gender, albeit in a slightly different context. Which brings us to a third aspect of my person that is often treated as a public spectacle: the fact that I'm transgender. I'll stop the reading there. But if you're interested in what being transgender, being a celebrity, and being a woman all have in common, well, you can pick up a copy of Sexed Up, of course. I also have an upcoming video called Prejudice and the Unmarked Marked Mindset that will delve into those connections. So if that interests you, please click the subscribe button to receive a notification as soon as it comes out. And once again, please consider supporting my work on Patreon.